And Princess of Wales have rolled up their sleeves to give back to UK communities following King Charles's coronation. Joined by their children, it marked an important milestone for Prince Louis in particular.
Princess Catherine had faced cameras through illness, scandal and royal upheaval without allowing the world to see her break. But this time, the pain was not hers alone. With her voice trembling and tears falling openly, she revealed that Prince Louis was suffering from severe fear and anxiety after a mysterious intruder repeatedly breached palace security, approached the young prince, and whispered a private family nickname that no stranger should ever have known. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine sat beside Prince William with a folded statement clenched between her hands, the paper bending beneath the pressure of her fingers. She had chosen a recorded palace address, a documented message released to the public, because she wanted no courtier, newspaper or briefing to soften what had happened. When she reached Louis's name, her voice stopped. She lowered her head, fought for breath, and then the tears came. William placed one hand over hers, but the prince did not speak. His silence carried a warning, the controlled fury of a father realizing that the institution he trusted had failed his son. The announcement named the crisis without disguise. Louis had been diagnosed with severe fear and anxiety after an unidentified man repeatedly crossed protected palace boundaries and approached him closely. Royal duties, public appearances, ceremonial rehearsals, and family events performed on behalf of the crown were immediately removed from the child's schedule. The decision mattered because those appearances had presented the young prince as carefree, while privately he had begun fearing corridors, unfamiliar voices, and even the sound of doors opening behind him. Catherine made it clear that recovery, not ceremony, would now control his future. Then she revealed the detail that changed everything. The stranger had not simply watched from a distance. He had come close enough to whisper a nickname used only inside the Wales family's most private rooms. Louis warned the adults after the first encounter. Yet his fear was dismissed as imagination. A written security note was entered into the official incident log, the formal record used to document threats and protection failures before someone removed it. William finally closed the statement folder. He declared that Louis would not return to royal life until every official who ignored him had been identified. The future king's words were measured, but the warning beneath them was unmistakable. Someone had buried the first alarm, and the same man had returned. Catherine's tears exposed the wound, but understanding its depth meant looking beyond the announcement and into the family, now struggling to protect a frightened child from the very world into which he was born. To the public, Prince Louis had always seemed fearless, the mischievous child waving from balconies, laughing during ceremonies, and refusing to be intimidated by royal formality. Inside the family, however, that brightness had begun to disappear. Doors were checked twice, footsteps in corridors made him freeze, and whenever an unfamiliar voice spoke near him, the youngest Wales child searched desperately for William or Catherine, terrified that the stranger had returned. Louis had once filled every room with restless energy, but now even familiar hallways made him hesitate. Catherine noticed the change first when her son stopped racing ahead of his siblings and began waiting for an adult before crossing a doorway. William saw it too, especially when the boy avoided palace staff he had known for years. That shift mattered because both parents had fought to give George, Charlotte, and their younger brother a stable childhood. Even while royal visibility, the constant public attention attached to members of the monarchy, made true privacy almost impossible. Catherine woke after midnight and found Louis sitting upright, listening to footsteps beyond his room. She sat beside him and promised the doors were locked. The child looked at her, then whispered that the man knew the name. "You call me when nobody else is there." His mother held him close, but the sentence followed her long after he finally slept. The fear was no longer vague. It had entered the most private part of their family life. William carried a different pain. He had accepted the first security assurance because he believed the incident had been investigated properly. Later, he removed his tie, sat across from Catherine, and admitted that he had trusted the system over his own son's fear. The prince did not excuse himself. He simply said, "I should have asked again." And the silence afterward felt heavier than anger. Charlotte then remembered seeing Louis recoil from a staff corridor days after the first encounter. She told her father that her brother had pointed toward a service entrance officials insisted had never been breached. George added something worse. He had found handwritten notes hidden beneath Louis's pillow, each one describing unfamiliar faces because the child feared adults would dismiss him again. William gathered every account and compared them with the palace report. The differences were impossible to ignore. Details remembered by all 3 children had vanished before the document reached him. Someone had not merely overlooked the warning. Someone had stripped it from the record before William could act. The family's memories did not merely contradict the palace version. They led William back to one precise afternoon when Louis first tried to warn everyone, and when the truth was deliberately pushed aside. The crisis began weeks earlier during a private garden rehearsal at Kensington Palace, when Prince Louis briefly stepped away from his siblings near a secured service passage. A man wearing a maintenance jacket appeared behind the temporary barrier, crouched to the child's level, and addressed him by the intimate nickname used only by Catherine. Louis immediately ran toward an equerry. But what happened next transformed a security breach into an unforgivable betrayal. Louis had been standing only a few steps from the others when the stranger crossed a service route. Officials had declared sealed. The rehearsal was private, not open to visitors, and only vetted palace personnel, selected contractors, protection officers, and household aides knew the children would be there. An equerry, a royal attendant, responsible for assisting members of the family during official activities, stood nearby. Yet the man still reached the boy before anyone stopped him. He whispered the nickname, smiled, and vanished through an access door that should have been locked. Louis grabbed the equerry's sleeve and repeated that a strange man knew his secret name. The child spoke quickly, pulling the adult toward the passage, but the attendant told him he must have misunderstood an authorised worker. He then guided the boy back toward the rehearsal. That decision mattered because it ended the first chance to seal the area, preserve evidence, and identify the intruder before he disappeared deeper into the palace system. Catherine noticed her son's silence later and knelt beside him, asking what had frightened him. Louis began describing the maintenance jacket and the whispered name, but a senior official stepped forward and insisted the child had encountered an approved contractor. The princess watched as her son stopped speaking. He lowered his eyes, stared at the floor, and accepted the adult's explanation, even though fear still tightened his voice. A junior protection officer refused to ignore the unease. He filed a preliminary incident note describing an unknown man near the service passage. An incident note is the first formal record created when a possible threat or security failure occurs. By the following morning, however, the entry had been changed to misidentified contractor, no threat detected, and the original wording had disappeared. Then another contradiction emerged. Security footage from the passage contained a 7-minute gap blamed on a routine camera reset. Maintenance records showed no reset had been scheduled or performed. William traced both changes to the same senior official who had interrupted Louis and authorised the downgraded classification. The future king read the signature twice, closed the file, and ordered the man summoned without advisors present. What had been treated as a child's confusion was now evidence of adult concealment, and William was about to confront the man whose signature had turned a frightened warning into palace silence. Prince William did not hold the confrontation in a grand council chamber or behind a table crowded with advisors. He chose a smaller room, dismissed every aide, and closed the door himself. Across from him sat the senior security official who had downgraded Louis's warning. William placed the altered report between them, followed by the original handwritten note, and asked one question in a voice so calm it was more frightening than anger. "Who told you to bury this?" Sir Malcolm Havers held his posture, but his hands betrayed him. As deputy director, he coordinated palace access reports and approved the final assessment of the garden rehearsal incident. That role mattered because his signature determined whether a warning triggered a full investigation or disappeared as routine confusion. William told him he had compared witness statements, access records, and the children's recollections. Nothing matched the version Havers had approved. Havers answered that Louis had been distressed and therefore unreliable. The words changed the room. William pushed back his chair and stood. He said his son had not been unreliable. The adults assigned to protect him had been. The prince's anger was no longer hidden because the altered report had not merely protected reputations, it had left a frightened child exposed. Catherine entered after hearing the raised voices. She placed Louise's handwritten notes on the table, each page naming unfamiliar faces and remembered details. The princess told Havers that every note existed because her child had learnt the palace would not believe him. She did not raise her voice. That restraint made the accusation heavier. Havers finally admitted he had been instructed to prevent unnecessary alarm before an important royal appearance. A royal appearance is a scheduled public duty carried out on behalf of the monarchy, and cancelling one would have exposed the security failure immediately. He refused to name who gave the order. William then revealed the fact Havers had tried hardest to avoid. The same intruder had returned days later near Louis's school departure route. The buried report had allowed an active threat to continue. Haver's face changed because he had not expected the future king to know. The silence stretched. At last, Haver said the instruction came from someone with authority over both household reputation and internal security, someone William had trusted for years. The official rose, but before leaving, he warned that removing one signature would not expose the whole chain. For William, that betrayal reached far beyond protocol. It struck at his duty as a father. The confrontation exposed the cover-up, but it also revealed something more dangerous. The person protecting the palace's image had possessed enough power to overrule those protecting William's child. The intruder had breached a gate, but another force had opened the path for him. The palace's instinct to suppress anything that threatened its image. Behind polished statements and sealed files stood a chain of officials who feared embarrassment more than danger. At the centre of that chain was Lord Adrian Pembroke, the fictional keeper of the royal household, a man who could redirect briefings, delay reports, and decide which warnings reached the family. Pembroke did not command protection officers directly, yet his influence shaped which concerns became official emergencies and which disappeared into internal paperwork. The keeper of the royal household was the senior figure overseeing palace operations, staff coordination, and sensitive crisis decisions. His recommendations carried enormous weight, because a warning he minimised could be delayed before reaching William, Catherine, or Charles. That power became decisive when Louis first reported the stranger. A major national ceremony was only days away. Pembroke believed admitting that an intruder had reached a royal child would force cancellations, trigger public scrutiny, and expose deep failures inside palace security. He chose stability over truth. The monarchy continued preparing for celebration, while Louis carried fear that no adult had fully acknowledged. King Charles read the suppressed file alone. He removed his glasses, placed them beside the pages, and remained silent as the scale of the betrayal became clear. His grandson's warning had not been lost through confusion. It had been weakened deliberately to protect a ceremony. The king had trusted long-serving officials to defend the family, yet those same people had treated a child's terror as a threat to the monarchy's reputation. Charles later faced William, without advisors present. Loyalty pulled him toward men who had served the crown for decades, but shame pushed harder. He finally admitted, "We taught them to protect the crown before the child." The monarch's words did not excuse the failure. They condemned the culture that had made it possible. William then uncovered a private memorandum recommending that Louise's distress be described as heightened childhood sensitivity if journalists began asking questions. The document proved officials were preparing a public explanation before completing the investigation. Worse followed. Access data showed the intruder's temporary credential had been sponsored through a contractor connected to Pembroke's office, but the sponsor's name had been replaced with an internal code. The future king ordered the code decrypted and immediately suspended Pembroke's authority. Within hours, another report reached him. The same man had been seen near Louis again after the first warning was buried. Removing one powerful official could not undo what had already happened, because the consequences of the palace's silence were now spreading through the family, and Louis was paying the highest price. The second encounter destroyed every remaining excuse. Days after officials had classified the first breach as harmless, Prince Louis saw the same man beyond the gate near his departure route. This time, the stranger did not approach. He simply lifted one hand, smiled, and mouthed the private nickname again. Louis screamed, dropped his school bag, and ran back inside while the vehicle waiting to take him away remained at the curb. Catherine found him in the entrance hall, fighting for breath. She knelt, removed his coat, held his face gently, and promised that nobody would force him to attend another event. The princess understood why the moment mattered. The first warning had been downgraded, so the intruder's face and possible access credential were never circulated through the full protection network. A protection network is the coordinated system of officers, alerts, access records, and threat notices used to guard the royal family. Because that system had been denied the truth, the same danger had returned. William acted within minutes. He cancelled Louise's scheduled appearances, suspended every rehearsal, and moved the child's daily routine to a protected family residence with a smaller security team personally vetted by him. The prince knew public duty could wait. His son's fear could not. Yet the decision also confirmed how badly the palace had failed, because royal appearances had continued even after Louis first said he felt unsafe. Charlotte reacted with anger rather than tears. She asked her father why children were expected to follow every rule when adults had ignored her brother for telling the truth. William opened his mouth, then stopped. No explanation could defend what had happened. The future king could only tell her that Hose responsible. would answer for its investigators. Soon identified the stranger as a former subcontractor whose palace authorization had expired months earlier. A subcontractor is an outside worker hired through another company rather than directly by the household. His credential should have been useless, yet it still opened selected service points. Internal access logs revealed something worse. Someone had repeatedly reactivated that credential for short windows, then erased the activity. The timing matched both encounters involving Louis. Arrests and suspensions began before nightfall, but the danger had already moved inside the family. Louis asked to speak with William alone. The child said he remembered one final detail about the man, something he had been too frightened to reveal while adults were still doubting him. The investigation had finally begun listening to the evidence, but its most important witness was still a frightened boy waiting to tell his father what everyone else had refused to hear. There were no officials in the room, no security folders, and no palace language to soften what had happened. Only William and Louis sat together, father and son, separated by the silence created when adults had failed to listen. Louis held a small toy in both hands and stared at the floor before whispering, "Please believe me this time." William moved closer and answered without hesitation, "I believe every word." William had chosen a private family room rather than an interview setting. He wanted Louis to speak without feeling examined, corrected, or rushed. The prince allowed every pause to remain because forcing the child into a formal account would repeat the same mistake that had silenced him before. Louis spoke in fragments, sometimes stopping to grip the toy more tightly, but his father never looked away. Louis then revealed the detail he had been too frightened to share. During the first encounter, the stranger had not only used the family nickname, he had repeated a bedtime phrase once spoken near an open window during a family stay. William felt anger rise, but he kept his face calm. The future king understood that his fury could look like blame to a frightened boy, and Louis needed certainty, not another adult reaction he could misunderstand. The child finally asked whether he had caused the cancelled events. William took both his hands and told him that a prince's first obligation was not performance. Royal duties, the public ceremonies and appearances carried out on behalf of the monarchy, could wait. Safety, honesty, and healing could not. Louis listened, and for the first time, the fear in his face began to loosen. The remembered phrase transformed the investigation. Officers connected it to an unauthorized recording device found near a private residential perimeter weeks earlier, then incorrectly logged as discarded equipment. Encrypted communications from Pembroke showed that he knew about the device and ordered the information compartmentalized, meaning restricted to a small group, so the wider threat would remain hidden. His decision had allowed the danger to continue. William asked Louis for permission before sharing the truth publicly. The boy nodded once. That small gesture changed everything. The prince left the room not as an heir defending an institution, but as a father determined to expose it. The announcement he prepared would force the monarchy to choose accountability over silence. Louis had finally been believed inside his own home, and now William intended to make certain the entire country understood exactly what that delayed belief had caused.